Hello and welcome, my name is Trismegistus and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 408, Statistics Improvements, Linux Adventures. Posted by Clonan and Raygard. Hello, welcome once again to the world of facts. Statistics by Clonan. Do you love watching the production graphs grow as much as we do? Accumulator Graph. It is a little bit tricky when you transition from steam power to solar panels and accumulators to know if you have enough capacity in the system to survive the cold, dark nights. Generally, you might just wait until nighttime and see if your factory blacks out. If so, build more solar and accumulators. And I think that's what most people do. I'll be honest, I'm a bit of one for just kind of building and building and building and then realising I've not got enough power, full stop. That's just sort of how I do it, and then I'll go like completely the opposite direction and sort of build loads and loads and loads of power that I don't need. And so there's a weird sort of, catching up and overtaking and catching up and overtaking all the time. And in particular with solar, one of the things you can usually look for in the power graph is if you're blacking out at night, then it's going to be obvious, but you'll notice that the accumulators will just drop down to zero at some point over the night, and that's when you can tell. And depending on how long into the charge, if they've never reached maximum charge, you're a long way off. If they've reached maximum output, basically, if they reach that and they sustain for a little while and then they drop off, then you've just got a little shortfall. If they're going all the way through and powering your factory overnight, then they're usually okay. And what you would then flip to, or what I then flip to, is then the actual power production. You will usually see a sort of step function, basically. So the solar will ramp up to its maximum value and it will sustain its maximum value while it charges the accumulators, and then it will drop off. And depending on how soon it drops off and how much of a sort of it literally looks like a step you've got in your power production, that's how much leeway you've got, basically. So if it ramps up to maximum and then basically immediately drops down to your normal production, which will be a wiggly line, then you've got loads of capacity. If it does it right at the end, just literally before nighttime falls, then you've got very little headroom in your power graph. So that's one of the things to look out for that. But as I say, in terms of how I usually build, I usually massively overbuild. You've got loads of stuff that I can't power, and then I'll just focus on building power for ages and ages and ages. So it's not very efficient, is basically the point. And the idea here is they're introducing some more statistics, some more charts in order to help making your builds a bit more efficient in terms of how much you build. So it says it would be helpful and convenient to see the statistics of accumulated charge levels, so we added such information. If you hook an accumulator up to the circuit network, you can actually get this information because it outputs a standard A. You can obviously change it to what it outputs, A for accumulators, and basically you can see the percentage. You can hook it up to combinators and all sorts of things. And it's one of the things I do if I'm building up my solar arrays and I've still got, for example, boilers. I'll hook a boiler up to, I usually hook the pump actually, but you can hook pipes and all sorts of things up to the, can you hook pipes up? I don't know if you can, but you can hook the belts up, you can hook inserters up and that sort of thing, and basically control when it turns on essentially the boilers. And you can actually see this in the graph we're about to look at. So this is the preview of the new GUI for the electric network info, as it calls it. So it's not power production as such, it calls it electric network info, which I think that's a change, but this might be a separate graph. It's not clear how you launch this in the game. This is the graphs, I suppose, is what I should say here. There's three of them. So we've got the standard consumption and production graphs. Your consumption is obviously how much power you're actually using. It's broken up by individual types. It goes on to say later on about features that you would quite like to have. And what I would quite like to have is, and I know it is effectively the production as well, but it's not. I would like to see the maximum, and it would obviously be toggleable. I mean, all of them are toggleable. You can just click on these and turn them on and off. But I would like to see the maximum consumption as a graph line. I think that would be, to some extent, particularly when you're looking at this sort of thing, more useful. You can see your satisfaction, but it does a weird thing that can be a bit confusing, where it particularly when you're blacked out, it sort of gives you the maximum charge that would be required, or the maximum power value, if every single machine was running at absolute maximum, which it's never going to be. So it will suddenly flip from going like that 580 megawatts. It might suddenly say, right, well, if you're blacked out, and so the maximum amount of demand you would have would be maybe 1.2 gigawatts. you don't need to produce 1.2 gigawatts because that's the maximum if all machines were on, and they're never going to all be on. So all of your robobots were, powering exactly the same time, providing maximum power, and it's never actually going to work like that. All of your inserters firing at once, they don't. So I think having a maximum, which is effectively some of these consumptions, would actually be fairly useful, so that you could look back historically and say, well, what was my actual maximum consumption? On the production side, then, we've also got, obviously, the equivalent curves. So this is what's coming out of each power source. You've got the solar panels there with the blue, and when they're charging the accumulators, they're at max output, basically. And then this is this step function I was talking about, where it drops down, and that's when it stops using that max power to charge the accumulators. What it's doing overnight, and as I say, they've obviously hooked up some kind of off and on type system, is that although actually it may just be that they have a shortfall, thinking about it, but this is the type of up and down curve that you would see in either case. And effectively what's happening is the accumulators are discharging, reaching a peak, and then essentially dropping off, basically, because they've hit their amount of charge that they've got in. We've then got the green line here, nuclear power kicking in, basically, to fulfill that demand. It's then hitting that max demand there, and this is the consumption that's happening here as well, because if you look at the timing, that's happening at the 4.7. So these spikes are these consumption spikes for the accumulators. So what's then happening is the accumulators are charging to a point when they are then sort of, because what the game tries to do is use them, sort of fixate on the sort of most free and most efficient power sources. So it'll automatically control them such that, for example, the nuclear will switch off, because if you've got accumulator power, it's cheaper to use that power, more efficient to use it because it's stored up free solar. And so what's happening is the accumulators are kicking in once they've been charged a bit by the nuclear. So what could also be happening is they could have a control on it so that it's actually switching the nuclear off when the accumulators get above a certain amount of charge. But as I say, it would automatically do that as well. But yes, basically what you're getting overnight is a switching between nuclear and accumulators, and that may not be something you want. You want more accumulators so that you can just power your base on free solar all the time, basically. So it's up to you, obviously, what you want, but that's what it's trying to show. What we're then getting here is a separate thing, and say this is A out of accumulators if you hook them up to the circuit network, but it's basically showing that the accumulators charge is hitting maximum of 47 gigajoules, which is set 47.5 here, and this is them charging up fully during the day with the solar, and then they discharge overnight. And then I say this is what makes me think they've got a control on it, because they never actually fully discharge, basically. So at some point the nuclear kicks back in and it keeps it above a certain point, basically. So it's maybe 15-20% they've got it set on, and then it's sort of kicking in and out as basically you switch between the accumulators. When the accumulators start discharging in that system, they'll go below that threshold and the nuclear will kick back in. So that's what you tend to get. And what they're basically saying is that the sort of ideal situation is probably more like it gets down to that level, and so the nuclear never kicks in and it just powers your base all the time, basically. So yeah, so that's basically the new graph to show the accumulator charge so that you can better produce and better manage your system. The main reason it was more critical was that on Forgora, the production from lightning at night time is much less predictable. So it is much more important to see the timeline of the accumulator charge. So here we have again, we've seen this base a few times, I believe. This is the one we saw, not last week, was it? 2 weeks ago, I think it was, when we were seeing the images of the base being walked around while the music was playing. This is the same base on Forgora, I believe. I'm going to talk about what's going on here later, so that'll be a separate speculation point at the end of the video, but basically the focus here is this electric network info again. What we've got now basically is that this, well, maybe the entire base, I don't know, but this base is essentially being powered by these lightning rods. So we know that we can gather lightning power and use it to power our base because it is just sort of free electricity, so it's almost like the equivalent of solar on Nauvis or something like that. But of course it depends how many lightning strikes you get, and they are an RNG, or they have an RNG element to them. I think you can probably pretty much guarantee a minimum or perhaps an average number of strikes per area, basically. And so we also know that they happen always at night, so you can pretty much guarantee there will be some strikes at night. But this is about optimizing this system such that when it does strike, you've got enough accumulators, you've got enough lightning rods, you've got an ability to capture all the lightning that you can do so that you can power your base with lightning and accumulators. So basically these, I believe, are the hits, essentially. So we're getting 11 accumulators, I keep calling them accumulators, sorry. 11 lightning rods producing 36.6 megawatts, I think, as their maximum power production. I think that's what's going on. It's a little difficult to tell because presumably these are separate hits or accumulated hits. It's difficult to tell whether they are single hits. But it's interesting that we have this spiking here at 167 megawatts and then more sustained here. So I don't know if this is just reflective of how the storms work, sort of thing. So, here we're getting a whole bunch of hits. Maybe it's to do with the density of the so I keep saying accumulators, of the lightning rods, that if you've got like one lightning rod, it'll get big hits of, the 167 megawatts. Whereas if in that area you've got 3 lightning rods, it's more spread out. So you don't get single hits of 167 megawatts. You get, as that shows there, 100 and what's that, maybe 125 megawatts, something like that. But it's in 2 different or 3 different locations, for example. So maybe that's what's going on. So effectively the lightning storm is moving across an area where they've got 1 lightning rod, and so they're getting big blasts, and then it moves past that, and then it's hitting this more densely packed area of lightning rods, and they're getting hits across on multiple, so it's like dividing it up. If that's the case, if it is that complicated, then you can see why having these extra graphs will be really useful, because you'll be able to see what's going on with your accumulators in particular. Because notice the accumulators do kick in when there's no lightning, so they are powering the base. Because this is production, so this is the output that's going on. And the consumption here is basically them going into the accumulator. So there's basically 98 megawatts of accumulator. So there's actually like a balancing thing going on effectively between what's coming in and what's going out. But basically, yeah, so this is presumably the base, doing a bunch of things. So like a load of robots fly around and get charged, as it does some things. But then this is another one of those peaks, and that's at night, and we're getting a lot of strikes happening and powering the base instead. And that's also then charging the accumulators at the same time. And here we again see the same thing. So these are individual strikes happening, presumably. But you notice, as I say, they are separately sized. But it also, I guess, if that's happening at night, maybe, then although it's powering it, it's actually discharging as well. So it doesn't grow at quite the same rate because it's having to output the power in these dips here when it comes back down again, maybe. But yeah, so this is basically the accumulators being charged by lightning. Science graph. You can track science pack consumption in the production GUI. But that does not account for things like productivity modules and the new research productivity technologies. So we added a new special item in the production statistics that shows the total final science that is produced. And here we see yet another GUI. It's kind of all GUIs this time, but basically this is the production statistics that you can get by if you click on the little graph on the just above the map screen, the mini map, shall we say. So this is a search they've done to search it down to science, but the basic point is that there's a new overall science production. Okay. And the issue here is that when you're producing science, for example, and I guess it applies to everything, although I hadn't really understood that it didn't account for this in the stats. But it seems to be saying if you're doing, red science, green science, blue science, all these sciences, it's not properly accounting for the fact that you've got productivity bonus. So it's producing a pack, but, you're getting free ones as well because of productivity. And I would guess this has become even worse. They didn't really say this, but I'm guessing this has become worse because of the internal productivity bonuses on the new machines. I believe, I may be completely wrong on this, but I believe they can produce science packs. So I may well be completely wrong on that, but I believe they can produce the science packs, and they of course have an internal bonus of 50% and also have more module slots on them. So you could get a really big productivity bonus out of a single one of these machines. So where maybe it was less significant with a normal assembler, it now becomes ridiculous. And of course these are bigger machines, so you can get more beacons on them, so you can have them running super fast, as we've already seen. So the science produced was obviously getting way out of step with what it was showing in the science stats. And this seems to then account for that productivity bonus. I believe it's the blue line here. The spikiness is usually to do with the way machines produce, in that they obviously output at a single point. They're never running. You get them all desynchronized, basically, so you get more of a blended effect. But particularly at the lower timescales, you'll see this spikiness no matter what's happening, because the actual science pack is, not being produced continuously. It's being produced as, particularly like when you get like the purple science, the yellow science, blue science as well, where you're making multiple of them. Make 3 at once and then nothing, basically. So you tend to get that sort of spiky effect going on no matter what you do. So you should usually look at a more long-term view if you want to get your overall science number. But basically this appears to be the net effective science. And it says science 773, so 773 per minute, represents the overall research output. Now, interestingly, it doesn't have an equivalent on consumption, which I would have thought it would have. But it doesn't. So what we're basically seeing here is, you notice here that the blue is 750 is your maximum value. So you're not getting more than 750 in a 10-minute period. So it's actually 74.8 per minute. But this is higher because you're getting a productivity bonus on that blue science. So you're actually getting 23 extra, effectively, I think. But I'm not 100% sure. I would need to properly look at this and understand it. It doesn't really go into explaining it anymore. Well, I would have thought your effective science was governed by your lowest one. So you notice here that the purple is actually running at 651. So is this 773 dictated by the 651 or the 750, or is it some average of them? It's a little confusing to me, because obviously you can only consume them depending on the research. We'll assume we're doing an infant research, which requires an equal number of all packs, bar military or something like that. So effectively, consumption is governing your production, because you can only consume it at a certain rate, and they're roughly matched, if you notice. Not quite, but roughly matched. So is this 773 like a sort of, because it's not an average, if you average those 750, you would get something around 670 maybe, because that one is quite a bit higher. So it's not an average. It could be the average plus the productivity, I guess. So you're getting 70 odd free, which would be around 10% or so. So that might work. But I would have thought it would be the lowest production that would govern your actual effective total. And I guess the other question there, of course, is does it account for the type of thing that you're researching? So here, for example, we're not producing white science. Is that because the thing we're making in science doesn't require white science, or is it just that it's fallen over and it's not working? It's also not making, orange science or what have you. So this production is giving you a feel, I think, for what productivity bonuses you've got on. I don't know that it's really telling you how fast you're doing science, because that's dictated by your consumption, and it doesn't appear to have an equivalent. So I don't know. That's one of the things I don't really get about this. It feels like the type of stat I would need to play around with and understand what was going on, do some experiments with, because, what does 773 mean? Is that your lowest with its prod bonus? Is it your average with its prod bonus? Is it your maximum with its prod bonus? What is that actually showing as such? We do also see here a little bit of a preview of something that's coming up, that this is Nauvis production. Go on to explain that they're going to do per surface stats as well. Per surface production. It was tolerable in the first days of playtesting with planets and platforms that all the production statistics were global. However, when you want to get more and more precise with your gameplay and trying to optimize each part, it becomes quite necessary. I assume they're meaning, breaking it down basically. For instance, on platforms, we need to know if we are producing enough fuel and ammo to keep the ride going. So yeah, I'm assuming that means, because it's what it's about to show, and what I've just said is that global stats were fine, but when you get into the game and you get more stuff happening, you need to have broken down stats, like per platform, per surface, etc. And here we see the preview. This is a platform, presumably flying between two planets or similar. I will again talk about what's going on here in the speculation part at the end, because it is fairly distinct. And we'll focus instead on the production stats that are going on here. So we've got platform Volcanus supply production. I'm assuming that Volcanus supply is what this platform, or perhaps the route that it's on, although I think it's the platform, is actually called. So this platform is called Volcanus Supply, I think, and that its platform tells it's a platform, whereas on the planets we would have this prefix of the planet name. So the icon and now this is the equivalent of platform, basically, because a platform can be tied to any. It can just be floating in space. It can be, going to a planet. It can going on a complicated route, I assume, between multiple planets, what have you. So I assume this has been called Volcanus Supply, and production is because it's the production stats. So here we have the production side of things. We also get the introduction of a global statistics little clicker, so little tick box rather, clicker. That allows us then to look at the global production as well quite easily. We've also now, and this is another thing sort of previewing before they explain it, we get a drop down for quality. So this is showing all separate. So it's showing all of the production, but it's separating them out, meaning that now it doesn't happen to have quality on any of this by the looks of things. But if you had what are they called? Is it basic? I don't know these names. I'm just not very good with this RPG, Blizzard, naming convention thing. But basically, quality 1, quality 2, quality 3, quality 4, quality 5. What it's saying is that it will show all of them, but it will show them separately. So quality 1, quality 2, quality 3, quality 4 will all be separate lines on the graph, basically. There is another option. It does show it later on, as I say, that you can have them all grouped together. So you could show the separate qualities, and you can also pick between the different qualities. So if you want quality 4, which is what we'll eventually see, then you would just be able to select everything at quality 4. So that allows you to look at your quality production stats. The thing here that's missing to me is an easy way of flicking between things. Now, we know we're getting improvements to the map thing that allows you to flip between surfaces, go to the different planets, go to the different platforms. So it is available there. It's not clear how the two interact to me though. So basically, if I change that one to now this, can I do that with this GUI open of the production stats, and it'll flick over and it'll keep that open. So if I want to check, I'm say making quality stuff on Volcanus, Nauvis, and one of my platforms. I want to flip between those to see are they all work? Are they which has got the most legendary items made, as it were? Which is working best? Which is doing this? If it's moving items between them while it manufactures them, where exactly is the bottleneck or something like that for level 3, level 3 modules or something like that, level 3 foundries or what have you. I think if you're looking at these stats, and certainly I can see a use case where I'm looking at these stats in order to see across multiple planets. So are we going to get a drop down that's just on the map view or something, that lets us quickly flick between the different things, and therefore we can just see these stats for the different surfaces? That would be fine. What I would prefer would be some kind of drop down on here. And what I would actually want, I think, is the ability to combine things. So global statistics is obviously adds everything up globally. That might be an odd term to use, given that global means a planet, but it means, within the entire system. What I would probably want is if I'm producing level 3, quality items, and I'm trying to do that across multiple planets, I probably want to see at some point the total for all of those, but then to break them down and combine them maybe. So in other words, if I've got a better example might be of, say I've got 5 platforms and they're all separate ones, they're all floating around in this asteroid field that I think we're going to get, grabbing resources and making quality level 3 modules or something like that. I want to just see how my asteroid field platforms are getting on. I don't want to necessarily see, well, if you combine that with Nauvis and Volcanus and Volgora and the other planets, what's the total there? That would be the global. I might just want to see what's going on with my platforms. So I want to see what am I producing on platforms 1, 2, 3 and 4, independent of what I'm producing on the planet, for example. And I'm thinking this mostly in terms of science. If I just want to see, say I've got 3 platforms producing white science, space science, I probably want to see the total of those producing space science, but also then perhaps the 2 that are around Nauvis and the one that's, say off in the asteroid belt doing science as well. I'm sort of speculating about how you'll actually be playing the game, because I don't know. But it just feels like the ability to group platforms up in an appropriate way would be quite useful because of what the platforms might be doing. An individual platform, I'm going to want to see, well, has it got enough ammo? Has it got enough fuel? What have you? And then for what the platforms do, so here, for example, they're gathering resources from asteroids, and I'm convinced, as I've said, that there's going to be an exclusive resource in the asteroid field, or from asteroids. I want to see how I'm doing on that on a total, and perhaps not have all the other platforms. Do you see what I mean? So having a drop-down that is a selectable list, saying, right, I want to look at this platform, and that planet, all combined, what are they doing? Yeah, so that feels like how I would want it to be done. In the same way that when they do the quality things, and I'm sort of preempting this a bit, but I'd probably actually want to maybe see like 1, 2, and 3 all together. So I might want to see everything. I might want to see just level 1, but I might also want to see level 1 and 2 because I want to see the production possibly and the consumption to see if everything's matched up properly. I'm spitballing things, but basically we're only going to get this like as a per surface thing, per platform, per planet thing, as well as a global option, and I think combining things is actually going to be useful. So I would probably want that added if we are adding things, and they do ask for suggestions basically. But yes, so looking at this more specifically, what it's telling us is that it's essentially processing a load of asteroids. Now, I believe we've maybe seen these icons before, but I believe these are the asteroid chunk icons. So when it grabs the smallest asteroid bit, this is what the icon for that looks like. And by production, it means the number that it's grabbed, basically. So it's grabbed 158 in the last minute of the one with the yellowy corner and the one with the blue corner. The one that's mostly blue. So I'm assuming that this is the iron asteroid. I'm not sure about this one. It might be the rock one, but it could be the one that has sulfur in it, maybe. But I'm going to assume it's the rock one. So it's grabbing iron ones and grabbing rock ones. You can actually see coal ones floating around as well. Well, carbon ones. So it's obviously not grabbing those. So I don't know if we can filter that. I don't know if we can tell a grabber just grab iron and stone and don't grab coal type of thing. It's just interesting that, because these aren't shooting at them either. So I don't know if there's some logic we can set that stops it doing that. But yes, basically they're count as produced. When you grab the item from space, it's count as produced, and they're then being consumed. So at the moment it's consuming essentially twice what it's doing in terms of the iron, and sort of, what's that, about 1.5 times for stone, and that's about 1.5 times for the iron. We will come back and look at this a little bit later on as well, because I think there's possibly some more interesting things going on here, or a little bit more detail. But basically it's consuming the iron and what I think is probably a stone one, although is there a stone asteroid? I'm not sure there is now, having said that. But it's consuming those two, it's grabbing those two and consuming them to make gun food, basically bullets, ammo, and also this is carbon. I'll come back to that later on. And it's super helpful when checking if a specific planet is producing enough when some items are crafted in many places. And again, this is what I'm saying. I'd probably want to maybe see not just the global, but like how much is being produced on Fogora and Volcanus together, how much is being produced on Platform 3 and Aquila. Those sorts of combinations seem like they'd be quite useful, depending on how things work. Again, this stuff on here that we'll come back to in the later on speculation, but here we're basically seeing what's going on Volcanus. Notice that there's a sudden spike here, so it looks like maybe something gets turned on basically, but suddenly we have basically nothing going on with production. It's just idling, and then suddenly whammo, it hits. So maybe this is a platform arriving and dumping off a load of, or a train maybe, it could be a train arriving, drops off a load of resources. What I think is happening here, just to preempt it slightly, I think this is making quality furnaces, basically. So I think that's what's actually happening in this little mini area of the factory. And so we can see here that we can basically see on Volcanus producing a load of them, and it's consuming a load of stuff as well. And as I say, we'll get back into the detail, but basically what they've got then is, we also added a checkbox to switch to a global statistics view, so all the possibilities are available for the player. As I say, I don't think it's all the possibilities, because I would want to see combos, but basically that's what that checkbox there is basically saying global statistics. So you go from what's going on, say, Nalvis, to what's going on globally. And you can look through to say, right, in the factory as a whole, across my multiple planets, are we producing enough uranium source material and I don't actually care in terms of the big numbers, where it's going, etc. Just am I producing enough, and then I'll sort out the transport later. So yeah, this gives you the full picture. Again, there's a couple of little things on here that we'll come back to. I'm afraid, teasing a lot of the speculation stuff. So if you want more of that isn't directly related to the stats, then that's all going to be at the end, basically. Quality graph. Going deeper still, we want to dissect our production by what quality the produced items are. And this is where we get this drop-down being explained. So this one here, the all separate, is actually a set of individual options that you can select between. And obviously you've got your globals still, so you can see it overall and on per planet, per platform. And as you can see here, this has been filtered to Epic. We will again talk about some of the stuff on this later on. Sorry for all the teasing, but yeah, it's just I sometimes get distracted on these with all the cool and new things, and the videos get quite difficult to edit, so I'm just sticking it all at the end. So this is now filtering down both sides to the Epic, so we can see the level 4 items that are being produced and consumed on Alvis, basically. So yeah, so that's really what's going on. And you can also obviously see, because of what they're doing, they're obviously either they'll be making things out of level 4 quality items, so that's why they're being consumed. But also you've then got that whole thing of going up the quality level. And as I say, that's why I would probably want the ability to see the individuals and, compare across. So is my level 3, rare production matched by my level 3, level 4, epic? Do you see what I mean? Because it's this percentage change thing, I'd want to see how we're doing across compare the different levels effectively, because in order to produce the level 4, you're going to be consuming a number of level 3s. Are there any bottlenecks, any problems that I need to be aware of? So it just then says, so what do you think? Are there any other statistic improvements that you can think about for 2.0? And I think the ability to mix and match. Now you could actually, the thing I've just suggested of seeing multiple things, you can actually do. It's just I would quite like an easy way of doing it, basically. And what you would do is you would hit the global statistics, and then, because you can turn these off, so you would then turn it off basically and just show that the ones you want. So if you wanted to see the amount of production of level 3 and level 4 quality blue circuits, you would just filter it down to those two. But that would involve a hell of a lot of clicking, particularly on a planet where there is a lot of production like Nalvis. It's a lot of clicking, so just being able to quickly see all the rares and epics and find them in the list, I think would be a little bit more useful. There is also, just to point out, as I say, there are two types of the all. So there's all separate and all merged. I'm assuming all merged, didn't quite explain it, but I'm assuming because all separate is talking about separating out the quality items. All merged sticks together all of your items of a certain type. So if you had all merged, then it wouldn't care whether it's a level 3 assembler, a level 4 assembler, a level 5 assembler. It just sticks all of those together. So you can see the total number of assemblers that you are building, say, on this planet or globally. I think that's what merged means, but I don't 100% know. Linux Adventures by Rayguard. Okay, so this gets very nerdy. So I said it before on the music one, well, for the last two actually, for the music ones, where basically I know that not everyone sort of cares about music in quite the same way, so I am going to read this through. I will be 100% honest, it is about Linux. I know very little about Linux. I've never actually used it, etc., etc. It's fascinating. I love the techie and nerdy ones. I appreciate that not everyone does. So if you like my usual speculation and stuff, there's not going to be a lot in this. This is really for those who like to hear me read out the Friday Facts, basically. I will try and explain the things I know, but I don't know as much, in Linux terms. It's just not something I have any real experience with. So what I would say is, and part of the reason I've been teasing, the speculation stuff at the end, is do feel free to skip to the end, basically, and look for this speculation section. There will be timestamps in the description and hopefully on screen. So if you just want to switch and listen to the speculation and put your own thoughts on that, then that's great. I hope you can appreciate that Linux support is just great to have. Games that support or as many platforms as they can are, I'm very much in favour of that. So the fact that Factorio has Mac support, Linux support, you can play it on Switch, it's compatible with Steam Deck. I think all of these things are great things. I think everyone would probably agree with that. But yeah, if you're not into Linux, you're not into the techie stuff, perhaps skip to the end. Also, just to note, I'm probably not going to do much editing on this section. I normally try and edit out while things like that. Because I know, or I'm pretty sure, most people are going to skip ahead to the speculation. I'm not going to spend my time kind of editing out all the ums and ers. I will take out, there's a few flubs I'm sure they'll make. So they'll probably go. But in terms of, making it smoother and, nicer and all that sort of stuff, I'm not going to take any of that stuff out. So I guess if you want to see what the raw edits are more like, or raw records are more like, then this will be an example of that. But yeah, it is really going to be me basically just reading it out, interjecting with a few techie bits where I can. Make of that what you will. I have appeared in a few Friday Facts by now, but I have never formally introduced myself. And this isn't me, obviously, I'm not Rhaegar. My name is Rhaegar. No, it isn't. I've been playing Factorio since June 2017, making mods for the game since the 0.17 release in March 2019, and I finally joined Wooby in March 2023. My primary roles at the company are expansion programming and Linux support, as well as being an advocate for the modding community. I've been daily driving Linux for multiple years and have fallen ever deeper into the black hole of customization and minimalism. Why don't most games support macOS and Linux is a sentiment I often see echoed across the internet. Supporting a new platform is a lot more than just changing some flags and hitting compile. Windows, macOS, Linux, and the Nintendo Switch all use different compilers, different implementations of the C++ standard library, and have different implementation quirks, bugs, and features. So I will just explain that. The way C++ works, and in fact it was C as well, and it's in C#, but basically that programming language, it uses a set of standard libraries. So those are effectively functions and tools and other things that you can call on that are just standard written as part of the code, basically. So you can call up a function in one of these standard libraries, and what that means is you don't have to write your own one. Now, whether that particular version of that way of doing things is efficient and well coded, and it may not even be there. There are some problems with standard libraries, but basically you can pretty much rely on the standard normal stuff that you might be writing is already in a standard library, and you can basically include that in your code, and it will use that standard function basically. And the point is that all of these different formats, all of these different platforms rather, all of these operating systems, the way the C++ code is written, the standard libraries will be perhaps not different, but implemented in a different way. So they may be grouped together slightly differently, or perhaps one of them doesn't have a particular standard library, or the way the function is implemented in that standard library is different. They may be quirks due to the silicon, the actual chips and stuff itself in terms of that platform. But basically, even if you're writing C++ code, there will be differences. So you can't just go, oh, right now I'm compiling for Linux and it will do it for you. You need to be aware of those differences, basically. Said I wasn't going to explain anything, but I will do my best. You need to set up CI for the new platform, expand your build system to support the new compilers and architectures, and have at least one person on the team that cares enough about the platform to actively maintain it. CI, I think, is where I've encountered it, means continuous integration. And basically, you might hear people talk about commits and like checking code out and these sorts of things. The idea with modern software dev is that basically, you have the main set of code, basically. This is the, what would you call it? The sort of, this is what we would eventually release sort of thing. And what people do is they check a copy of that out, and they can then work on that code separately and independently. You're not tied to someone else doing things. It's not like, because what you could do is two of you could be working in the same function. There could be a function that is doing a sort, for example. That's just a random example, and you need it to be able to handle strings, and the other person needs it to be able to handle booleans. So integer, or integers, or all these different other things. Now, actually, the function would almost certainly have the capability to do that. It's just an example, but basically, you might be working away, getting it to do boolean, getting it to do. I can't remember what example I gave. Strings, for example, and the other person is getting it to do, integers. And those aren't, so long as you're using the same, way of doing things, essentially, those are compatible. They can be put together, and you just have 2 bits of the code which does those different things, because you're not doing, you're not rewriting the same code. And you can actually do this in the way it's done, but they can be stuck together. But of course, 2 people can't physically write in the same, place at the same time. So what you do is you check copies of it out, you make your changes, and then when you merge them together, there's a whole process, continuous integration, where the code, and a lot of it's automated now, where it basically comes along and goes, right, these are 2 different things, but they both fit in the same function. They're not overlapping in any way. They haven't done anything that contradicts each other, so I can just combine them together, and it's now in the same function, and it just has 2 different parts to it. So it's not actually how you would do it, but basically the idea, as you can see, is that 2 people can work on the same thing independently, and so long as you have a process for checking what they've done against each other, they can then just be merged together. Just be merged together, he says. Crikey. I don't know how many hours I've spent doing fixing commits, but anyway. But basically, yeah, so that's the sort of idea, and continuous integration is the way of doing that. But it's all platform dependent, you see, because you've got, things that will be in because of the different libraries and all that sort of stuff in the different things, but you want to maintain a single version of the code. And so you need a process for managing that, and then saying, right, well, if I'm checking out the Linux version and I do Linuxy things, it doesn't break any of the Windows stuff, and it can just be all merged together. So yeah. And the real point there is that having someone who cares, basically, because what will always happen is if there is not someone who cares about a thing, it will just get forgotten about, broken. The old versions just will never be updated. The bugs won't get fixed, etc., etc. So you have to have someone there who's an advocate for keeping that. If you're a video game, you will likely need to add support for another graphics backend, such as Vulkan or OpenGL, as well, since DirectX is a Windows exclusive. If you've never encountered that, DirectX is the Windows graphical API, basically. It allows you to talk to graphics cards. Both Vulkan and OpenGL, I think, are open standards. I mean, OpenGL, the clue's in the name, but I'm pretty sure Vulkan is open. But what they are is basically like community maintained. So they're not they're not proprietary. Now, I think Windows gives away DirectX. I don't think you have to pay for it, but of course it's only Windows compatible, So it doesn't. You can't use it on a Mac to talk to your graphics card, because it's just not. Doesn't work basically. But what it does mean is that something like Linux, which is an open operating system on and of itself, well, that's a bit complicated, but that has an open element to it, shall we say. That may well then implement a open, graphical API, an open graphic system, because it wants to keep the whole thing open. It doesn't want to have something that's proprietary in something that anyone can download, compile, and use, basically. Many developers will take one look at the Windows market share and decide that it is not worth the trouble to support other platforms. We will just open that up. Let me just show you that, because that's basically saying this is the percentage of PCs, I think, is it PCs? Yeah, desktop operating systems. So I guess it doesn't include laptops or Steam Deck or something that are, per operating system. So effectively, Windows is just almost totally dominant. As you can see now here, you've got a 73% market share for Windows. In other words, 73% of desktops have Windows installed on them. Now, one of the things with that, I think, is it Mac that's second? OS X, yeah. So that's the Mac standard, Mac operating system, and that is 15%. So when you combine those together, 72 plus 15 is what's that, 87%. So that's 90% of the market covered. Your actual Linux is like 4% or something, I can't remember. But yeah, so the basic point is, because you've got Chrome for, I guess, for your Chromebooks and things like that. But basically, these are negligible, essentially. And that's why you don't see much support, because why spend the money, given you've got to do all this extra work to support these other platforms, if basically no one is going to buy it on those platforms? You also have, and it does mention this, Steam actually has a thing in it that allows like Linux games to run. It's like a wrapper, basically, that allows Windows games to run on Linux. So again, why bother supporting it natively? The other thing to note is traditionally, I know you have this situation now in mobile where Apple makes like 90% of its money from the iOS store. But traditionally, Apple never really gave a monkeys about games. And so they never really properly supported it. They didn't have a Steam equivalent. They were always particularly on the desktops, always very much focused on like work effectively. So, it's why you have such a bias towards graphics and editing and all those things being done on Macs, because their focus has always been that for the desktop systems, not so much for when they start getting tablets and, as I say, obviously now phones, the predominance is really games in reality, but they kind of treat that as a separate thing. It's a bit strange, really, but they never really felt like, it's like there's almost a weird attitude of, if you got desktop, then you must be doing work, whereas if you got your mobile phone, you must be playing games. It's a strange kind of attitude to it. But basically, yeah, even with this 15%, Apple gives so little of a monkeys about games on their desktop systems. They've never pushed it, really ever. You get the very small handful of games that release on Mac, and that's it. They don't care effectively. Also, with the meteoric rise of the Steam Deck and Proton, it is easier than ever for game developers to ignore Linux support, because Valve does some black magic that lets their games run anyway. And that's what it's saying, basically. So this Proton, basically, Steam OS is a Linux-based system. And basically, if you've got a Steam Deck, you know that it runs all of your all of your games. Well, obviously there's compatibility issues, but basically they put a wrapper around it, and it's incredibly efficient as well. You can almost not detect any kind of, performance, degradation from the actual that side of it. Any performance is just because the hardware is not up to it, sort of thing. It's never really because the operating system is having problems. It's really very clever. But anyway, the point is that because you've got this thing that will sit on a Linux, machine and just run games for you, why do you need to bother making a Linux version? Factorio supports macOS and Linux so well because there has always been someone at Wooby who actively uses these platforms and is willing to take on the burden of supporting it. In fact, I always seem to remember they were actually advertising someone to do the Mac version, but that was years ago. So anyway, our native Apple Silicon support is a great example of this. Today, I will take you through some of the adventures I've had with maintaining Factorio's Linux support. I said it was going to get nerdy, so strap in. Wayland. My first self-appointed task after joining the team was to add Wayland support to the game. Wayland is a new display protocol that has been in development to replace the antiquated and insecure X11 system. Modern Linux distributions are beginning to switch to Wayland as default, so supporting it in Factorio is paramount. We utilise the SDL library, which neatly handles most low-level system interactions and then abstracts them into a common interface. SDL has support for Wayland, so all that I theoretically needed to do was build SDL with Wayland enabled and it would just work. However, it's not quite a simple plug and play. Wayland provides protocols in the form of XML files that you then use the Wayland scanner binary to convert into C program and header files. As I say, nerdy. Or techie rather, not nerdy. So an SDL is a simple direct media layer. I had to look that up. But basically it's like the interface point. So if Wayland is the protocol, it's like the, I guess the way that it does the thing, and this is obviously graphics, then the SDL is like how you interact with it. So it's kind of like the API side of it. And this is why it's talking about the whole Wayland scanner. XML files is just a particular type of format. XML is like a standardized way of doing it, of like structuring a file basically. So if you imagine something like an Excel file, it carries a lot of baggage and way of doing things related to how Excel formats a file. Whereas XML is very much an open thing, and it allows you to effectively define internally how you structure the data. So you can then basically interrogate that, how the data has been put together, in order to, like, it comes with its own instruction set essentially, or it can do anyway. And basically, the idea is that it converts them into actual program and header files, which is what we were saying before about C having all these standard libraries, and this then allows you to incorporate Wayland into your code basically. So yeah. So I said it was going to get technical. Being relatively new to C++ at the time, my initial solution was convoluted and involved checking the generated Wayland protocols into our source tree to be manually regenerated every time we updated SDL. A few months ago, armed with a year's worth of experience, I improved this workflow to automatically generate the files as a part of the build process, so they're always up to date with the protocol XML files that SDL ships with. I'm not even going to try and explain that. I do kind of get what it is, but it's way too much techie detail for this, I think. Factorio has supported Wayland since 1.1.77, but it needs to be explicitly enabled by setting SDL video driver equals Wayland in your environment. For Factorio 2.0, I added a drop-down to select your preferred preference in the GUI. So basically, it's been there for a while, Wayland support over this X11, but you had to actually turn it on, essentially. Now, I don't know why this is blurry. I didn't read this part, if I'm honest. So it says, because this is one of those slidey between diagrams, I assumed it was actually showing us the drop-down, like the tick box. So if I added a drop-down to select the preference in the GUI. There we go. So preferred video driver. Oh, it's got grabbed here. So this part here, preferred video driver is Wayland or versus X11. I think the blurriness is actually showing something as well. So we've got X11 left, so that one, versus Wayland right, with the desktop display scale set to 125%. Notice how the game renders at the display's native resolution when running under Wayland. Okay, so X11 just does an upscale, which is why it's blurry. So it's just literally blue, blue. It's just literally zooming it in, so making it bigger, and therefore it gets blurry because you lose the detail. Whereas this one actually renders it at 125%, so it renders it bigger. So, if it was 100 by 40 or whatever, random number, just so I can do the maths, natively, and you wanted it zoomed in by 25%, then it would be 125 and 50, sorry. And of course, and the idea is that X11 is just literally taking that 100 and blowing it up, whereas Wayland is actually rendering it at, at the 125. It's interesting that the things move as well. I guess that's because as you render at a different scale, the exact position of a thing is not actually the same because it has to be pixel perfect. So it's ever so slightly moves it as you re-render it. But it does actually seem to be like different. The scale of that is smaller. Interesting. Client-side window decorations. Once Wayland support was implemented, I received a bug report that the window was missing a title bar and close buttons, which are called window decorations, when running on GNOME. GNOME, I think, is just a Linux. Yeah, it's just a Linux distro. So basically, the close button. So this is the close button, and this is the title bar. So basically, the sort of term for those is obviously window decorations. I didn't know that, if I'm honest. Basic idea seems to be that once you'd implemented it, someone running on GNOME lost the title bar and close button. I don't know how I explain that. Most desktop environments will allow Windows to supply their own decorations if they wish, but will provide a default implementation on the server side as an alternative. The reason I didn't really know any of that is because Windows, you almost can't have them on. You've almost got to force them off or replace them. There is no not having them on. So GNOME, in their infinite wisdom, have decided that all clients must provide their own decorations, and if a client does not, they will simply be missing. I disagree with this decision. Factorio does not need to provide decorations on any other platform, nay, on any other desktop environment, but GNOME can abuse its popularity to force programs to conform to its idiosyncrasies or be left behind. So I guess GNOME is one of the more popular implementations of Linux, but seems to be that it doesn't have this support, and so because it's popular, you've kind of got to put it in. It is a very odd decision, I must admit. To fix this, I had to bring in another dependency, libdecor, basically, so library for decorations. It functions, and SDL even has support for it, but a video game shouldn't have to supply window decorations in the first place. Go on, Lee's hobby horse there. The game has decorations now, but the theme doesn't match. Thanks, GNOME. It's interesting that they can't effectively reuse, because it has these decorations basically on the actual when you're in the window, basically, doesn't it? So it's got the title of what the window is, so that and that doesn't have an X on it, but the X there, and those are the decorations that Factorio has built for its internal, for the game when it's running. So it's interesting that those can't be sort of lifted up onto the main window itself. But I guess this is operating system specific rather than specific to the game. So basically these are standard imported ones. So I think the theme side of it is basically because this is the window, this is like the, the theme that Rhaegar has enabled, which is like, when you have dark mode and things like that. And essentially, and it's got the circly buttons and, that's how it's doing the title bar. And because this is imported from just this, libdecor clearly has a standard set that you can just use, and they're not going to bother writing into something that will pull out the same theming from the operating system and implement it in the game or for the game. So they're just using that libdecor as just a quick solution for GNOME, but it means that you get this differently looking set of decorations, basically. I'll be honest, that's the type of thing. It's one of the reasons I have never really got into Linux or anything like that, because you get this. Puritanical is not quite the right word, but you tend to get this thing of, and it's a very software developer thing of saying, right, this is the right way. This is the way to do it. This is correct. This is how it should be done. And so obviously the GNOME, developers, the GNOME implementers have decided, right, well, we shouldn't provide a thing. Every application should provide its decorations. That's what it should do. And absolutely everybody else has made the opposite decision and said, right, well, we'll always have, because you need them to function as a desktop, as an operating system, we will provide a standard set of them, and you can replace them if you want. But GNOME people have obviously been on some puritanical, as I say, it tends to be a lot like that with Linux, I find. They've made that decision because they think that's right. They shouldn't be providing these things. It should be the applications. And because it's become popular, it's then, you've got to comply with it. And I say that's the type of thing that's always turned me off of it, basically, because it's all very much, and there used to be Red Hat and stuff like that. And it's like, are you using this version or that version or the other version or, this derived version from that third version, which was also derived. And so you get this like nested set of assumptions and, decisions that have been made that mean that your, desktop is completely unique just because of the nature of what the thing is. And so if you get some problem, you've got to fix it yourself, And so that's always been my kind of problem with it, that the advantage of buying a piece of software from Microsoft is there might be things that are broken in it, but it's going to be broken for everyone. It's going to function in the same way for everybody, and when they get an update, you get an update. Do you know what I mean? So it just makes everything smoother from that point of view, even if some of the things they've done are bad or not functional or problematic. They are for everyone. Sorry, I got my own hobby horse there. Window resizing seizures. A video is worth more than 1,000 words. And I'm going to flag this warning. Photosensitivity warning, rapid flashing images. Skip ahead by, the video is 9 seconds long. That's all I will play. So skip ahead by, 20 seconds, 30 seconds or something like that. Because this is very, very, very flashy. And if you have any kind of sensitivity to that, then you might not want to watch this bit. I will play the video as I say, and I won't say anything so you don't miss anything. But yeah, this is, it's horrible to look at without any of those issues. If you have them, do skip ahead. Okay, oops. So it's over now. If you skipped ahead, basically what Rhaegar is doing is resizing the window, and it's flickering and jittering all over the place because there's some mismatch between, well, it explains it, some mismatch between the update, like speed, for the, as you resize the window and the actual game itself. There is just a little joke on here as well. This is a very deep cut, but the game save file name is Make Bwhuho Great Again. To explain that reference, so when they were doing the person was doing the AI deconstruction of the blurred images, one of the first results that came out was Bwhuho, spelt like that. This was for the planet that the unblurring for showed as Bacchus. Now we happen to know, or we happen to have seen what the planet is actually called. It's not called Bacchus. I'm pretty certain that it's actually called, if I can click on the right one, whatever that is. I believe that, I guess I could be wrong, it really is called Bacchus, but I believe that whatever that is, Gieber or Glaber or Quaber or whatever the heck that is the actual name for what we've all been calling Bacchus, because these are the planet names, and I think that says space as well. So these are the themes that have been composed for the different surfaces, and I believe that one is what Bacchus is actually called, but it was never called Bwhuho. That was just a misfire on the AI translation. And the reason I mention it, obviously you've got the Make America Great Again slogan thing, which no comment. But basically, that has become a bit of a meme on the Discord, and Rhaegar is very active on the Discord. Basically, that Bwhuho, when people say that, they mean this unrevealed planet. But yeah, so that's a very deep cut joke, that one. But yeah, it was quite funny to see that. I do lurk on the Discord. I don't get on with Discord as I never really got on with like instant messenger type things. It's like Twitter and stuff like that, because it's just like this continuous stream. It's like, I always felt that those messenger type things are like everyone talking in a room, which is what it literally is. But if you're, I can't stand, when you're in, I've never been very good at, the social, it's not really social, but like when you go to things for work, or I go to things for work, there'll often be these bits where you're meant to do networking, basically. And the idea is you wander around and talk to different people. Now, I struggle with that because I'm very shy and introverted, but I also always struggle, when I do find someone to talk to, I can't hear them because, and this is coming back to my audio issues again that I was talking about with the music. I get like this sensory overload of like all these people talking around me, and I can't necessarily hear what they're saying, but I'm trying to, and that's the problem. That I'm just trying to listen to all these conversations going on, and I can't hear the person I'm talking to because I can just hear all this background noise. And I find, Discord and MSN before it and all these types of, Twitter as well, that continuous flow of everyone talking all at the same time is too much for my brain to handle. And I'm much better at a single person conversation, and that's what I always found with forums, because you can follow a thread better. And things get gathered. I know, obviously, Discords have sections, and this isn't a great advert for my own Discord, is it? But I'm not active on my own Discord. But basically, when people start a forum thread, obviously it might go off topic, but it's about that topic, So if it's about, Fulgora, then there will be all the posts in that forum thread will be about Fulgora. Whereas someone will just mention on, Discord, Fulgora, and then you'll get 4 posts that are, separated by 5 other conversations that are going on. And I just really struggle to follow the thread of the conversation. And that's, as I say, I'm not really active on any of these new social media things, because I just find them very confusing. I thought I might interject that, because as you can see on the screen, there is an enormous chunk of undecipherable text coming up, so I will not be reading that out, but yeah, you can see how technical this has all got. I use the Sway window manager, and a particularity of this window manager is that it will automatically resize floating windows to the size of their last submitted frame. So this is talking about this video again. This has unveiled an issue with our graphics stack. It takes the game 3 frames to properly respond to a window resize. So when the window is resized, there's like a call that comes out and says resize, and it takes 3 frames, so which I presume to be effectively UPS, in order to action that change. So the result is a rapid tug of war, with Sway sending a ton of resize events and Factorio responding with outdated frame buffer sizes, causing the chaos captured above. So in other words, Sway, and this is the thing I was saying about Linux, you have to plug in everything. There's nothing that's there for you. I mean, imagine how basic something like window resizing is in Windows. You don't even think about it, and yet you've got to plug something into Linux in order to get it to do it. Anyway, so you do the Sway thing, and basically you drag, what he's doing is dragging the window size, yeah, and because there's this delay, this lag in the response from the engine of 3 frames, when it gets the reply of saying, right, what have you resized to, or what size are you now, it fires out the old answer. So effectively it's sort of going, what size are you, and it's coming back 1024 by 768, and it isn't, because you've resized the window. So then it jumps to that size, and then it says, oh, I've just heard your request to resize it, now I'm 1023 by 768, because you moved 1 pixel. And so suddenly it will then say, right, now I'm 1023 by 768, so it will jump in. And so you get this flickering thing where it's flipping between what the game is currently at and what you're requesting it to be, and it's lagging, so it's getting that jump, juddery, like when you watch a video and it'll stutter. That's effectively the same thing. I spent 2 full days staring at our graphics code, but could not come up with an explanation as to why this is happening, so this work is still ongoing. Since this issue only happens when running the game on Wayland under Sway, it's not a large priority, but it was too entertaining not to share. Dynamically linked libraries. A dynamically linked library is a DLL, basically. So if you must have seen or heard of, if you're a PC player, a DLL, and that's what DLL stands for. So in a C++ program, there are 3 ways to load or include a library. Firstly, by including it in your source binary, a static linking. Secondly, by having the system load it when your program starts, which is dynamic linking. Or thirdly, your program loads it explicitly at startup, dynamic loading, or what I call runtime linking. So if it's in your source binary, if it's in your code, then that is literally that it's there all the time. It's just part of your application, and it sticks in these standard source libraries. If it's dynamically linked, then it only loads it in when you actually start the program. So when you then do the dynamic linking, it's not actually part of your code and always there sort of thing. So when it compiles it, it's not part of your code as such, but the link is. So as I say, you'd probably be familiar with DLLs, and basically the idea is that when it starts the program, it loads up that DLL as well. So, so it's not actually in the code itself, it's linking to it when the program starts. And the third way, which I'm not sure I was 100% familiar with, but so that's the program loading it. Okay, so the program basically makes a call to it rather than the system. Okay, interesting. So we have many libraries such as SDL, FrontStash, and Lua that are statically linked, but Factorio 1.1 also has many dynamically linked libraries. And then it basically just gives a list of the DLLs. Again, I'm not going to go through that. As I said, you can have a look at those yourself if you really want to. But those are all the ones that it links dynamically. Among these libraries are X11 and Pulse Audio, which are being deprecated in favour of Wayland and Pipewire respectively. This causes a compatibility nightmare because if any dynamic dependencies are missing, the game will not launch. This obviously will not do. The presence of these dependencies confuse me because we utilise SDL for most of the low-level syscalls, audio and video, and SDL relies entirely on runtime linking. An investigation revealed the source of most of these dependencies to be Allegro, the low-level library that we utilise for most of Factorio's alpha phase, but we have since replaced with SDL. The only remaining use of Allegro in 2.0 was as a secondary audio backend in case a user experienced issues with the SDL audio backend, but the SDL backend has been stable for a very long time, so the time was ripe for its removal. This eliminated 123,024 lines of code from the game and drastically reduced the number of dynamic dependencies. Again, and that's the shortened list. So what you need to capture there is that it had this giant list, now it's got this short list. What it's basically saying is that some of these linkings were because of things that they're getting rid of anyway. So because they're getting rid of them, they could take out the linkings. And the problem essentially was that if it couldn't find the thing it was being linked to, it would just not work. So if it's calling up something that's been removed, it would just fall over and say, no, can't find this thing, I'm not proceeding. So the idea is that because they're being deprecated, they're all being removed from everything, you might as well just get rid of the calls anyway. Clipboard Woes. It turns out that Allegro was not the only thing requiring us to link against X11. Back in 2017, we received a bug report that a user could not paste large blueprint strings into the game, and Oxid fixed this by adding support for X11 incremental clipboard transfers to our GUI's backend's clipboard handler. Crikey. I was hoping to utilise SDL's built-in clipboard functionality, but unfortunately SDL does not support incremental transfers. This means that there are three options. 1. Continue linking against X11, requiring users to install X11 on their system to be able to run the game. I don't want this mess with static linking. 2. Figure out how to do runtime linking and implement that. Or 3. Upstream our incremental transfers code into SDL so we can leverage SDL's clipboard functions and other SDL-based games can benefit from our work. As you might guess, I chose the third option. The work to upstream our code is ongoing, but should be done in time for Factorio 2.0's release. I just read that straight through because it is techie. The basic point is that someone was trying to import a very large blueprint string into their Linux game, and it was causing it to crash because SDL does not support something called incremental transfers. There were two options for sort of workarounds, but the third option was effectively to use the whole open source thing and update SDL, essentially. So what they are proposing is a change to SDL to make it support these incremental transfers, and that will go into, because it's an open source piece of code and it's managed in that way, SDL itself will be updated to include this incremental transfers, basically. So that's kind of one of the powers of open software dev. And it's the sort of flip side to what I was saying, in a sense, about you having to build everything yourself in Linux, because you then get everyone supporting it. So if they find a bug or what have you, then they can make a change to the source code and everyone benefits from that change. So that is the flip side to this, shall we say, messy way that you need to build your own Linux, build your own operating system, essentially. Asynchronous saving. Many of you might not be aware that Factorio has support for saving a game in the background without freezing while it does so. At the moment, when you save, it does the whole bit where it pauses and it does the save, and if you've got a gigantic file, then it can take quite a while. This feature is tucked away in the hidden settings and only works on macOS and Linux, so nothing for Windows. This is one great example of taking advantage of a platform's features to benefit the game, which would not be available to us if we simply went through Proton. Proton, as I say, was that wrapper thing that allows any Windows game to run on a Linux thing, but it is running it in a shell, so you can't take advantage of native features. Asynchronous saving works by using the forks syscall to essentially duplicate the game. The primary instance, the one you interact with, continues playing, but the newly forked child runs the saving process, then exits on completion. There's a lot of techie language in there, but basically it creates a copy of the game at the point you hit save, and is off there doing that save of that version of the file while you keep playing. So that bit where it's you get a message saying the game has changed, do you want to save it? Effectively that's happening in the background, and what it's saving is the version that you saved at the time you wanted it, rather than when it actually completes the save operation. I have used it for many years and have never had issues, but the setting remains hidden because there are a few unsolved problems with it, and it requires a significant amount of RAM to work. As you can imagine, you're effectively running 2 copies of the game. I would like to promote this feature away from its hidden status in 2.0. If you are playing on Linux or Mac OS, please enable asynchronous saving. You can do that by hitting Control, Alt and left clicking on settings. So when you're in the menu, there is this hidden extra set of settings. They mentioned it last week in terms of the audio, because there are some deep audio settings in there. And basically you get at it by hitting Control, Alt and clicking settings. I thought it was just Alt, but Control, Alt it must be. And what you do is you literally hold those 2 keys and left click on settings, and it'll come up with a sort of extra other settings, which is the rest basically, and you can go into that. It feels like some kind of weird hack or whatever. The stuff that's in there is really deep dive stuff. When you actually read it through, it is things where it's like, well, I can understand why this isn't in the main list of settings. It's some extra things that you can play with, but for most players, in most situations, it's not actually useful stuff. But yeah, that's how you do get at it. And report any issues you find. I am particularly interested in reproducing a seemingly random freeze that occurs at the end of the process. Thank you in advance. So I guess when it stops or when it's finished doing the save, there is a freeze that sometimes happens, but they can't pin down why. Continuing development. This has been but a glimpse of the work I've been doing to ensure Factorio in Linux is the best that it can be. There are still many open bug reports and other issues, but I am generally happy with the state of things and can confidently say that Factorio has great Linux support. As always, submit a text buffer with your feedback to the usual places. Okay, so let's get back to this speculation then. First off, we'll look at this one and kind of dissect it a bit. I don't know that there's anything new particularly here, but we can have a look and see. This is the blown up image. The actual picture in the Friday Facts is reduced slightly, so this is the full size image, and we can obviously blow it up a bit further, but I believe this to be part of the Fulgora map that we've already seen a few times. What this is a scrap. So there's obviously a rail, a train coming in, but this is a scrap patch, so you can see the edges of it up here. So let's just zoom in a little bit on that. So we have the edges of the scrap patch here. These are big mining drills, and they are outputting directly into passive provider chests, basically, so the red chests. I believe the big mining drills, I know the big mining drills have a bigger mining area. I can't remember how big that is exactly, but they certainly cover over into this here, so you don't necessarily need to go right up to the edge as such. The reason they're outputting into the passive provider chests is because it's a bot mining setup. So bots are going to pick things out of these chests and take them to these requester chests, because these are recyclers. So what they're doing is they are mining the raw scrap from the patch and immediately turning it into the output products. These couple of recyclers are actually on this new whatever it is landfill thing that allows you to build on the oil sand. So that's another use of that there. We've seen that before. Now these guys, of course, output directly onto a belt or into a chest. So while they have an inserter to insert from the requester, they are outputting into the passive provider. We then have some requester chests here, and we can see the inserters holding the various products that come out of the recyclers. So we have the ice blocks, we have they look stacked to me, which is interesting. These don't look to be the same size. And I think that's because of the stack bonus you get. It's not quite the same as stacking on belts, but it's it's holding 5 items thing, and it shows you a stack of them. I think that's why they look different sizes. They are then outputting these. So this train is literally picking up, as it appears, everything that comes out of the recyclers, essentially. So it's not filtering, it's not doing anything like that. It's literally taking the raw product off for processing. We have a lightning strike, obviously, here. We've got a couple of, I think there's another one further over as well. Yeah, here you go. So we've got a couple of the lightning rods. Yeah, so there are a couple of little interesting bits to note as well. What they're doing here, it gets a bit buried in the detail, but because both the big mining drill operates like a normal mining drill and can output directly onto a belt, and the recycler can do the same, they're feeding the big miner here and here directly into a recycler, which is then feeding directly into a passive provider chest. And because of this larger mining area, I suspect that this still gives full coverage, that everything underneath the drill, everything underneath the recycler would still get picked up, basically. So this is still giving the full coverage, even though there's this big gap, I think. I don't actually know how big the size is, but you could certainly imagine overlapping a second set of these here, and you would definitely cover all of that area, so it's not written off as such. We see the reds here. This is obviously, it's run out of resources. The yellow, it's waiting for room in the box, basically. So these are clearly absolutely stuffed full of scrap. That's how much they've got out of it. What we can't really tell, because it is a little bit blurry and because they're stacked up, is exactly what these have in their hands. I think these are the ice, so the water. There's a lot of that, actually, which is interesting. But then we got, I think, a red circuits. I think we've got copper wire, we've got blue circuits here. This looks like solid fuel, which I think is something we do get out of quality. But then you got these, which are like stone, and I don't know that this is stone or not, because if that's a piece of stone, that one there, is that stacked stone, or is that one of the other? Is that holmium, basically? Is that the new thing? But it's because of the way it's stacked up and it's blurry, can't quite tell what that's supposed to be. But yeah, I couldn't see anything especially interesting other than that in this picture. It's just a few details that explain or show some examples of how you can set up things. It's obviously bot-based, mining, and yeah, this is just an interesting example of how you could set up a scrap patch. The next thing I wanted to do was have a look at this in terms of the actual platform itself, so what it's doing and how it's working. There are some other bits on this chart here that we'll pick up in a later point, but basically this is the platform. So if we zoom in on the top here and just look at what's going on. As I mentioned in the main read-through, there are pieces of, this is the coal asteroid, and there's one over here as well, that the gun turrets don't appear to be shooting. Now, the belts do have bits of ammo on them, so I would assume, there's quite a bit here, so I would assume that they would shoot at those. So it's interesting that they aren't. And it's not because it's gone past the point where it's going to damage the platform and there's no grabber arms, so it doesn't, it chooses not to shoot, and it's not shooting because it's not going to damage the platform. There are grabber arms here, so these, I would have thought, would shoot these in order to grab them, because I think this is too big. I think the little chunks it grabs are like smaller than that. So it's interesting that it is not shooting those pieces of coal, given that it should have ammo and you would expect it to be grabbing them. So that makes me wonder whether you can tell them to grab or not grab. I don't know. We have all sorts of stuff going on here. There appears to be almost like a sort of circular bus where they're basically putting stuff from the grabber arms, and then like the inside lane has got ammo on it, and then the outside is just like a collection of whatever's come out of the grabber arms, basically. And I think there's a crushers putting on as well. I mean, there's certainly crushers here. I couldn't tell from all the spaghetti whether they would end up on this, because it seems like there's basically a circular belt going around the entire edge of the platform, and it's just putting the random junk that it gets from the asteroids on there. That's being processed then, but it's also using that to stock up all of the gun turrets that are around the edge. What it also appears to be doing, and we can't see the filters, and I assume there are priority filters being used, is that same thing is kind of being used to, because it's got this new edging on it, basically, the whole circuit network connection thing, and that appears to be going around the whole of the system. Now, I couldn't see, because we know that undergrounds break it, and it only puts this edging on if it's got a wire connection. And I couldn't actually see where the wire connection is on some of these. So this part here, between these two with the underground, it should be breaking the wire connection. But where is the wire connection on that belt? So I don't know, that doesn't feel consistent with what we were told the other week. But basically this appears to be like an overflow, so when this fills up, it's got a priority thing on it, and it will then send it that way, I think, is the idea. And that it will then dump it out into space so that nothing gets clogged up, because you have this risk, I think, with platforms where they're flying through and maybe they get 10 water asteroids and suddenly your entire system is clogged up with water ice, and then you start missing the resources you need. And speaking of water ice, that's what appears to be happening here. So this is the stuff coming out of the asteroids. It does appear to be stacked up again, so it's clearly coming out in quite a lot of volume to get these. But it's then being put into the crusher, which turns it into these are like the water meteorite fragments, I guess, and then this is the actual water ice, which is then pushed around here, and these chemical plants are turning it into liquid water and feeding it into all of these. This is also giving us more information on the rocket fuel, basically. So what we're seeing here is that iron ore plus water gives us the blue fluid, and certainly carbon, or there could be something else, because these aren't actually loading the carbon in, but certainly carbon plus water gives us the orange fluid. I say this can be something else because all of these inserters are sat here waiting for something, even though there is carbon stuffed on this belt, because that's what this is. This black one is the carbon that comes out of the other meteorites. I believe we also have here, this is the metal one, I think, because if you notice is that one of them? It's difficult to tell because of how I've zoomed it in, but there appears to be something there that's going that way, onward. Oh no, that's coming out. Sorry, that's going the other way, isn't it? So that's being fed to something off the edge here. I thought that was going up, but it's actually going down. I didn't spot that. I mean, it could well be being dumped offside, and it's only keeping some of it, couldn't it? It's probably what's happening actually. But yes, so there's those parts of it, and this, as I say, is telling us that the ingredients for the blue is certainly the iron ore plus water, and this one, presumably because it's got the carbon on, involves the carbon, but does it also involve something else? I think it probably does, because of how these inserters are just sort of sat here. Now, I'll go into it a little bit more detail later on, but what we can see, and I did mention this in the main read, is that it is producing these two types of asteroid, or chunks, basically. I believe the yellowy one with the yellow corner, is that one there, and that the sort of blue one is that one there. It doesn't have on here the ice one, but that's clearly that one there. But yeah, this also appears to have the carbon on it, so this is the carbon here, and that's what I think the black stuff is on the belt there. So I don't think there's anything massively new in terms of that, but I will pick up slightly on these chunks here, basically, in a moment. So the next part I wanted to talk about is again about the asteroids, but it's slightly weird, or extremely weird actually, and it's this thing, basically. So I can zoom in on that, and I don't know about you, but I don't recognise that. Maybe we have seen that one before. Stylistically, it looks like one of these, so it looks like a chunk of meteorite, basically. So where we've got the one with the yellow edging and the blue one with a bit of orange on it, that one looks stylistically like one of those. It could, of course, be one of the icon for holmium, or something like that. It could be the ores are now not always going to be represented as the bits, as it were. most ores are represented in that way, as the iron is here, where it's like bits, collected together, whereas, the asteroids seem to be being represented as chunks, as like a single solid chunk. So I believe it is a piece of asteroid. Now that's one thing, because it's very orange, which I think means it's possibly the copper meteorite chunk. We have had, I think, confirmation that asteroids are going to have other stuff in them, because we've seen sulfur, for example, and I think it was confirmed that later recipes allow you to extract other things. Now, what this is and what it contains is not necessarily the most interesting thing about it. To me, the most interesting thing is the fact that it's a level 4 quality piece of asteroid, which is weird because, we were told, I believe, that raw resources don't have quality, so you can't have quality iron ore, I think, but we can have quality asteroids. Given you then crush them to make them into ore, that would tend to suggest that actually you can have outputs from asteroids that are quality. That's very, very weird. Another possibility is that this isn't really an asteroid, not a grabbed asteroid, that it's actually something you can make, that it's some intermediate step, so that you take, say, a bit of copper and a bit of iron and what have you, and somehow squoosh it together, and you get this weird lump, which you then can turn into other things. So they allow you to have level 4 quality, so that the thing you turn into can be of a higher quality. But it's weird. It doesn't kind of make sense as a thing. To me, I say it looks like a piece of asteroid, but it's level 4 quality. What's going on there? It's also being consumed. So this is obviously Nalvis, so it's not a platform. So they've gone to the trouble of coming from somewhere else to Nalvis with this chunk of something in order to process it. They're processing very slowly, 5 a minute. So what's happening to it? What is it being made into? What it's being made of? I am wondering if this is actually maybe Bacchus as we know it, or Glavy, or whatever its real name is, whether it's related to that, and perhaps this is the product of that planet, and that's why it's this weird thing. Because I'm being maybe a little bit paranoid, but it looks like a little creature to me as well. I say it does look like these. Yeah, it does look like that. But also, and I say maybe I'm just being, over the top and what have you, but it almost looks like it's got 2 eyes there and like claw-like things. But there is that thing where you stare at something for too long and you start to see things that aren't there. But it seems to be patterned in a much more detailed way than I would expect, in a sense that it's got like, stripes on it in a sense. However, I think the more likely explanation is the copper asteroid. Although, why would you be bringing copper to Nalvis? Because it's orange for copper, and also the green, the verdigris, that you get, that would be the equivalent of rust for copper. So that's probably the most likely explanation, but it does look a bit like a creature to me. So yeah, that's very interesting. The next one I wanted to talk about was also on this one here as well. By the way, I think we have consumption of level 4 items. I didn't say this in the video, but I should have done, because they're being upgraded effectively. So they're trying to make legendary. So they are consuming robots. They're not. This isn't like a super robot or something like that, or a way of making level 2 robots. They are basically trying to make legendary robots for some reason, and so they are consuming those robots basically. I don't think it's anything more than that. In the same way that they're trying to make level 4 efficiency modules, so they are level 5 efficiency modules, sorry. So those are being consumed, and the same reason, that they're being produced as well. People were saying on the forum of like having standard colours for things, so that green circuits would always be green or something, or green science would always be green. I don't think you could really do that because you've got too many things that have the same dominant colour. What I do find frustrating is where it uses different colours for the same items across charts. So in other words, we've got level 4 logistics bots rather here in pink, and we've got them in red there. So you can't just look at and say, right, what's all the pink ones? I know that's logistics bots. And then look here and see all the pink ones and they're logistics bots. It isn't. The pink one is whatever the heck that thing is. So It's can be. I find that a little difficult because you have to really work out what it is you're looking at. The thing I wanted to point out was this blue thing here. It's obviously the same model, the same item as a full uranium fuel cell, but it's a bright blue colour. Okay, this could well be a placeholder in terms of the artwork, so it could be something else entirely. But I don't see why they would, if they were going to use a placeholder, they would use something that was similar. Basically, I would expect. When we saw the placeholder for tungsten, which is on some of these other things, when we saw that, in fact, let's have a look at those just quickly. So yes, here we go. So this one shows tungsten carbide, I think this is, but that's a placeholder because that is the concrete icon, and I don't think they're going to let us put tungsten carbide on the surface like it was concrete. It may form part of the concrete recipe, which is why they've given it that colour, that pattern, but it's a placeholder, and it's just a recoloured concrete piece. I think it's actually is it the enhanced concrete? I can't remember. But basically, it's just a placeholder. They will, come up with some other icon, I believe, is the idea. But, they're just reusing and recolouring an existing icon. But it's thematically similar. As I say, I think it's because this tungsten carbide will be used in the super landfill. I think that's how it's made, and because it's tough and strong and stuff. But I don't think they will actually use that icon and recolour it. They will come up with a new icon. And it's the same here, that this is something to do with power, something to do with nuclear, something to do with that whole production chain, that whole power production system. So they have used the fuel cell icon and recoloured it. Now that could be because it's finite and that in it is intentionally a bright blue one, or it could just be they've recoloured it so that they know what it is but kept it thematically similar. So they've not just taken a logistics bot and recoloured it purple because it's plutonium sort of thing. That they've not gone completely random, so it's thematically in the same area as nuclear power or nuclear fuel cells. And the question then is, so therefore what is it? And my guesses would be two things. I've speculated before that we will get some kind of fusion thing. We already technically have fusion in the game with the portable fusion generator. I'm wondering if we get that. We've seen on the Fulgora, I can't find it. We've seen on this Fulgora map that it has some weird structure that looks like it's getting an adjacency bonus. And I wonder if that is basically plutonium-based reactor. So it's basically the same reactor, but you can feed plutonium in and you get more power. And perhaps plutonium becomes a side effect, a side output from uranium. But I'm wondering actually if it's something to do with fusion. And we will get fusion generators, and that's a way of kind of giving us a lot of power without having to do water, or a smaller amount of water or something like that. You would expect a plutonium generator maybe to run hotter, and certainly to last longer. That's kind of the thing with plutonium. It's a lot more stable. So basically that could be one thing, is that you're using plutonium power and it gives you more power and it lasts longer and you don't have to make as much of it. Because remember now this, which actually this is being consumed on, so it's not being produced on necessarily. We can't see it in the production tab. It might be there. My theory with the Fulgora one is that you would transport plutonium there, or fusion fuel, you would transport it there because it's deuterium basically, and you would transport it there, or you would be able to make it because it's just water, heavy water, and that would be a way of getting around this lack of water on these other planets that you would get then. It's the nuclear equivalent for these other planets. Because it's fusion, you can bring the cells in, they last for absolutely ages. You don't need to use water because reasons you would actually in reality. But that gets you a way of working around. That gives you a nuclear power type for planets without very much water, which we seem to have two of already. So the other one is that it's plutonium, and say it's just beneficial, it's better. The other thing to it though is, again, it is a level 4 quality item. I was under the impression that sort of raw, like things that were used in fuel, as it were, so like rocket fuel and nuclear fuel and those all sorts of things, weren't going to have quality equivalents. I don't actually remember where I read that, so I may just have made it up in my head. But they weren't going to have quality versions. I mean, I guess maybe if this is like the super fuel that you can run an entire megabase on one of these fuel cells, having a quality version of it that burns even slower or gives you even more power would make some sense. The benefit you get from making the quality version must be quite high, because if you think about it, if you get a wastage level of, say, 50%, you would need the bonus from each level that you go up to be more than 50%. Otherwise, why do it? So in other words, if you get, say, a gigawatt out of a single fuel cell, if you don't get 2 gigawatts out of an enhanced one, a level 4 one, why consume the two, why do that RNG roll and lose one of them if you're not going to get more than the 2 gigawatts? Because you're just wasting fuel effectively. So the other option is it's nothing to do with power, just a placeholder, but as I say, they have been fairly consistent with like keeping the placeholders thematically similar. And it could be that it's because you need it for something else, that it goes into the building of a super Spidertron, or maybe the new player avatar uses these blue plutonium fuel cells, and that's why you can just put one of those in when you build it and it never needs powering up, or whatever mad thing it could support. But it's just interesting that it is a recolored fuel cell and that it is being made at quality level 4, which is really expensive to make. They're also making 4 a minute, so it's not one that's accidentally been produced somehow. They are clearly making that with some intent. So yeah, there's some interesting things going on here that, I don't know, it's going to be fascinating to see what's actually going on in the game. The next thing appears to be perhaps carbon fibre. So on this one here, well, I guess first off, I think this is again for quality reasons, but they appear to be consuming 52.6 of the grabber arms per minute. So in other words, they are consuming almost one a second, basically, of these grabber arms. Why are they consuming them? It feels like this is going into a higher quality version, maybe, because we know that they gain arms every time they go up a quality level. So I think there would be a huge benefit to doing them. But that's a lot of these grabber things to be consuming, because I'm sure they can't be cheap. Anyway, the thing that really I was really wanting to talk about is down here. Let's see if it can show it properly. It's on the very edge of the screen, and it is itself whatever blue quality is. But this is, I think, probably carbon fibre. If you've ever seen carbon fibre, I'll probably actually, let's go and search for some. So carbon fibre actually comes in, well, it's actually 2 parts, because there's like a resin part to it and the actual fibres of carbon themselves. But basically it comes in rolls. It's a flexible material. So you can mould it to whatever shape you want. That's the whole point. And then you cure this actual resin in order to harden it into that shape. But you see, it comes in rolls, so it comes in floppy rolls, and that I think is probably what's going on here. I was hoping there might be an actual sort of roll of carbon. Maybe if I do there you go. So you've got an actual spool of carbon fibre, with the material just rolled up on a roller. And I think that's what's going on here. I think that is a roll of carbon fibre. Partly, if you look at it, I don't know how clear that will be on the video. If you go and look at it on the actual Friday Facts, you'll see that it's got like diagonal crossing lines on it, basically. And that's one of the hallmarks of carbon fibre, is that sort of weaved pattern of that's crossing over. It's where it derives a lot of its strength from, because it's then, individual strands are not necessarily strong in every direction, but if you weave them in all directions, it's not all directions, it's the diagonals and that, but if you weave them in multiple directions, you therefore build up strength across all of the fibres. So yeah, to me that looks like carbon fibre. So I think we're probably getting carbon fibre in the game. It's another strong material. It's a strong and light material. It has to be something for late game though. So perhaps there is an upgraded version of platform stuff, because that's the type of place you would expect to use it. It would be in aerospace, it's in high performance materials, high performance applications. It's somewhere where you need strength but lightness. So I wonder if, and it's being made it's an intermediate clearly, and it's being made at a level of quality. So whatever the benefit, whatever it's being used in, and it could well be to do with these grabber arms, that, in order to make the higher level grabber arms, you need to add in other resources. That's something we've not really seen with the quality side. There's not been really mention of, in order to get a level 5 quality grabber arm thing, you need to put in an extra material. You see, my problem with it is you need the grabber arms early on, I think. I think they're in a relatively early tech from when we first saw them. And for them to use carbon fibre, that means carbon fibre material chain needs to come in. And there's like a self-fulfilling loop that they've got to break somewhere, because unless we can make coal into carbon. That might be an option. Our only source for carbon is the satellites, is the asteroids. In order to get the chunks of asteroid, we need a grabber arm. Yeah, so you can't have it that the grabber arm uses carbon fiber in its makeup, I say, unless you can make it from coal, because you've then no way of getting it. If you need carbon fiber to make the grabber arm thing, and you can only get the carbon for the carbon fiber from a grabber arm thing, you've got a loop that you can't start, basically. So it could be, and we've not really seen this before, or had mention of it, that when you go to higher level quality, you actually need to put new things in. So you can't make, level 2 grabber arms unless you put carbon fiber in, because then that allows you to build more arms in it. So it could be something like that. I don't think it's that, though. I think this is instead like a high performance material for something else. As I mentioned before on my speculation, my sort of mega speculation video, I think we might be making some kind of mega structure at the end of the game. And so, we've got tungsten, which is a really strong but relatively light material. We've got carbon fiber now being made. These are all things that you would use in aerospace type applications. They can't be part of the platforms because we get them a lot earlier. So what are we making that requires these materials? It could be simple things like there's going to be a level 4 assembler or something. I can't see it being tied to the foundry or the EMP or whatever we get on the planet formerly known as Buhuo. So I think it's some future advanced technology. They could have tweaked recipes. It could be that artillery requires carbon fiber or something, But, it can't be in trains. It could be in bots. There could be a level 2 bot that we don't know about. It could be used for that. It could be this player avatar thing that I think might be in the game. But I suspect it's used in a thing, as it were, and that the thing is some megastructure that we're building. One of the things to note there, of course, is that it's being produced in relatively high quantities. You're getting 49 per minute, and you're also getting 49.6 assemblers per minute. So it's at that sort of volume of production. You're making as many, they're making more grabber arms, which I say is the bit. They're consuming them, sorry. So we can't assume, I guess, that they're being made at that rate. It could be that a platform has arrived with a ton of carbon fiber on it and it's consumed it all. But you would tend to think with an intermediate, it's probably being made at the same sort of rate it's being consumed. But yes, so this was absolutely fascinating. What could we be using carbon fiber for? Are we getting planes in the game? That's the type, as in aeroplanes, or some other type of transport vehicle, a space plane maybe, so that we can zip across. This was one of the comments I made about if you have to sit on a platform for an hour to get to Volcanus, that's an absolute pain in the bum. And if you need to move between planets, so maybe there's like a shuttle, there's like a hyper, fast jet that we can build that lets us get from planet to planet super quick. But you can't build it big enough to make that practical for the space platforms. So you just build yourself one, and that lets you just fly. You use a space plane to get to Volcanus in record quick time so that you can move about quickly. Maybe it's something like that. As I say, there's all sorts of possibilities. It will be fascinating to find out what we're actually using it for. Okay, so last one is the Volcanus one. Don't think there's a lot to say about this. I hopefully said it in the main video. I don't know as I'm recording this bit, but I think it's being used to make high quality foundries, basically. So I don't know what level it's getting up to, but we've certainly got level 4 foundries being produced. Now this is the picture itself, and this is where it's being done. So we know that foundries can make foundries. So that's what's on the belt here. The foundries are producing the foundries, and these are where they're being recycled. So you can see the little green dots, and those are level 2 foundries that are being then recycled, and they're being put back in, and you see it's got the level 2 icon on the what's been recovered from the material. So this is just that loop you have to go through for quality. We know the foundries require lube to make, so that's what's being fed in there. I don't think that's particularly new or interesting as such. We have the production stats here, as I mentioned earlier on. This is the tungsten carbide, but it's a placeholder. We don't know what it will look like yet. And so there are little bits and pieces around the edge, but I don't think any of those are new. I couldn't see anything. If there are hidden bits in any of these, do give me a shout. But the thing I wanted to point out, and I really don't know what to make of it at all, is this, basically. So on the very edge here, now can you see that above my head? Yes, you can. So right there, above my head, is something. Now, it's clearly a thing, as it were. meaning it's... because it's very regular. It's very, well, you've literally got the chests below, ordered up, exactly in rows, perfectly there. It's not some organic thing, as it were, that, just happens to be there or what have you. It's also volcanous, so we know it's not one of the alien artifact things on Folgora, unless they happen to be on this planet as well. It is a bit odd that these aliens apparently own... I mean, I guess you could understand with Volcanus, because it's a volcanic planet, it's constantly recycling its own surface, so it would have gone by the time we're here, but it's a bit odd that there won't be other... why does Nalvis not have anything on it, given the aliens are clearly... were able to do exploitation of their entire solar system? Anyway, the basic point is it's not something like that, so it's not randomly placed. It's in a nice ordered structure. But, for one thing, it's actually got a number written on the side, which is 079. I did wonder if it was maybe something in relation to, like the spaceship, that you crash land on. Maybe it was... because to me, it looks a bit like, when I did my Crashdorio playthrough, there are like extra debris things, because you can actually use it to like power your first machines, basically. So there are extra bits that land as debris, and it looks a bit like those. It looks a bit like it's a piece of debris. It also looks like it's something that's crashed on the planet, so it looks like it's sort of landed. Now in SpaceX, which is one of the things I have done on SpaceX so far, is that you do have these like pods that you can fire that allow you to send, and it's one of my frustrations with it, you can send certain intermediate ingredients, in small quantities between planets using these space capsules. So I wondered if this was maybe the Factorio equivalent. I don't know why they would all be stamped with 079 on the side. That seems like a very random number. Hopefully it's zoomed in enough that you can see that, and my bonce isn't in the way. I say hopefully it is. If not, you can go to the Friday Facts and zoom in. But it does seem to have 079 on the side, which it doesn't mean anything to me, but maybe it does to you. But they also seem, very regular. It's very fixed as a pattern, so it implies something that the engineer has maybe placed. But it does look like it's, the way it's got the dirt is it's like it's crashed into the planet. For example, the chests just sit on the surface, and if you really look at them, you get like this disconnection between the like texture that they're applying, because it's just a texture. But these actually have like a scuff mark, like it's come in and it's buried into the surface. So what is it? They look like, as I say, they look like they'd be fired out of a cannon. So there's that. And it could be that they're being fired from the other planet, but I don't know what 079 would mean then. It could obviously be a longer number. It could be just that it's buried. But why is it so regular? It feels like it's something that the engineer has targeted putting it in that area, and it's literally put, he said, put it in that space, and it's literally just filled up that area. But nothing seems to be happening with them. They've not got inserters on them. They've not got anything like that. So what are they? What's going on? It could obviously be placeholder, and they've taken, say, a thing from one of the mods that one of the developers has done and just used that temporarily. But I don't know. It looks like, what are other possibilities? It's something that's boring into the ground, like it's a way of getting lava out of, when you want lava. I don't know. It's just very, very sort of random, but also very regular in a way you wouldn't quite expect. So what is going on there? I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you'd like to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday and Sunday over on my Twitch channel at Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. All of that malarkey.